welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to LS swap your car, but more specifically, we're going to talk about how to swap an LS into your RX7 FC. But for you guys that don't have one, don't run away just yet, because a lot of this stuff is just LS specific. There's only a few things that are going to be car specific. So the reason I wanted to do this video is because a lot of the times on social media, I do get a lot of questions, and I love answering questions and stuff like that. I love engaging with you guys. But I want to put this information out and kind of consolidate it, so that way when people do message me, I can say, hey, go reference this video, and it will give them whatever information that they might be seeking on my particular setup. So just a brief overview on what I'm currently running. I'm currently running a 2000 LM7 completely stock, no cam, no nothing. I have it bolted to a Z32 trans out of a 300ZX. We'll go over all these things. All right, so that kind of covers the general build. Let's dive into more specific stuff, and I'll kind of walk you around the engine swap itself. All right, here's my LM7 truck motor. Obviously, I've switched over to the car intake manifold just for aesthetics and clearance issues and stuff like that. I prefer this one, but this one actually flows worse than any other OEM intake manifold. So if you guys can run the truck manifold, I'd suggest it. I just don't like them because they're kind of ugly. If you leave the cover, the Vortex cover on them, they actually look pretty good. But I prefer the look of this. It has something to do with the runners. These have shorter runners. They don't flow as good, but it's marginal. All right, so on the accessories, I'm running an ICT kit. I'm running the factory truck pulley, which sticks out farther than the car pulley, which makes it to where you have to run spacers on the water pump if you're going to run a car water pump, which that's what I'm currently running. A lot of people don't like putting the 3/4 inch spacers on there to space it out. I don't see any reason not to run them. I think it's just that people don't like the fact that there is another gasket in between there, but I've never experienced it leaking or anything like that. And I got a nice place to put my temp sensor, nice threaded hole. I don't have to tap into the water pump or anything like that. So I just prefer it. And then I have done the adapter for like the head port on the back of it. I didn't really like that setup. I actually ended up breaking the adapter off in there because it's pretty thin and janky, but I just prefer it up there. It's a little bit more accurate. So talking about the cooling system, since we're here, just running just a Griffin radiator with a nice big 2100 CFM 14-inch fan. On this car, I run a rear mount radiator as well as a front mount radiator to do as much hot lapping as I possibly can. I will leave a link in the video if you guys are interested in seeing how I did that whole setup. The other thing is the steam ports. You really have to make sure that the steam ports are hooked up, don't block them off, and then that they are the highest point in the system, well, the highest point on the engine, so that way they can flow up to something like this, which is like a surge tank. It comes up here, the air separates, water goes back down and goes back into the engine. I will leave a link to Pirate 4x4. They have a really good forum on how to route LS cooling systems for like off-road vehicles and stuff like that. That's where I got my routing. They got a bunch of different options on there. They really break down the cooling. So if you can like dial in the cooling on these things, they're great. But enough about the cooling system. Just get it dialed in. That's the biggest thing. Get it dialed in, monitor it, and you'll have a good time. So on the engine mounts, I'm running the Ronin Speedworks kit. High quality stuff, really like it. Fitment's really good. The engine literally is on the firewall. It's within less than half an inch, and it's literally touching the firewall. So very good placement, as far back as it can go back, and yeah, just a solid all around kit. It's a little spindy, but you get what you pay for. I think with this one, you get much higher quality stuff. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the oiling system. I get a lot of questions on Facebook. What did you do for your oiling system? And I see a lot of people, they do Accu sumps or dry sumps and stuff like that. Real expensive stuff. I personally run a Moroso pan with trapdoors in it and an extra quart of oil. And then I've told this to people and they go, well, you can't run an extra quart of oil. Well, you actually can, because if you actually read the C5 Corvette manual, owner's manual, it'll tell you in there to run an extra quart of oil for any kind of track driving. And my buddy Isaiah turned me on to this. It was something that I was already doing, but he found it in the manual and said, hey, some information for you. So I'll put up a picture of that so you guys know I'm not completely full of crap. But anyways, so the engineers at GM knew that this was a problem, and that you need, if you're going to do any kind of track driving that has excessive G's or anything like that, you need to have an extra quart of oil in it. Thus far, it has been a great recipe for me. This is a $200 motor, and it has made it 4 years under red line, constant drifting. It is literally getting abused every time it starts up. You know what I mean? Like, start it up, warm it up, go out on track, and just beat the crap out of it. Come back and go back, and rinse and repeat. So it's a recipe that works for me. I'm not gonna say that it's gonna work for everybody. There's a lot of variables and everything like that, conditions of motors and different stuff, like different things like that, and the person that had it before you. So this is what works for me. I think it'll work for other people. The engineers at GM said that this was a good way to prevent your engine from rod knocking, and I tend to believe them. I have 4 years on this engine. It's in its second car. So basically, enough talking about the oiling system. Get a good oiling pan, run an extra quart, you should be fine. Taylor Ray also has a really good video on some of the other things that you might want to replace when you do your LS swap. Had I watched that, I probably would have done most of what he said, minus the Accu sump stuff and stuff like that. There's like a barbell in the back, and then like a cam plate or whatever. But other than that, I think that kind of, no, we got to talk about the electrical system, or engine management. So I run a PSI harness. It's a 3-wire hookup. It's really simple and easy to use. I think I paid about 500 bucks for it. I've noticed that there's some other companies out there making cheaper ones. I don't know the quality. They almost look like a clone of the same wiring harness that I have, and I think I've seen them for around $350 to $400. I don't know the quality of the wires and stuff like that, but the PSI wiring harness for roughly $500 to $600 has been a really good investment. It was plug and play, ready to go, no issues there. As far as engine management, I use the stock ECU with HPTuners. I know a lot of people like to use Holley. I don't see the point in spending the extra money. It cost me $300 to get the dongle for HPTuners, and then another $100 to license it, which I think is a really good price, because in order to have somebody unlock your ECU, if you're not going Holley, it's usually like $200. They want to charge you double what it costs for them to unlock it. They got to make money. There's nothing wrong with that. And so for me to invest another $200 and be able to do it for myself made a lot of sense. I've also unlocked other people's ECUs for them, you know, homie hookups and stuff like that. Obviously, they paid for the licensing. All I did was hook up their ECU into my car, run the scanner, or not the scanner, but license it, and then unlock it for them and just hand them their ECU and say, here you go. Didn't do any tuning or anything like that, but yeah, it was worth it for me to spend the 400 bucks. Also, on the tuning thing, is some of you guys might not think that, oh, well, it's just OEM, I'm not changing a whole lot. It's really, I really feel like it's really important to go get your LS tuned after you do your swap. There's things that change, and there might be some minuscule things that you don't think matter, but I really think they do. And I learned that the hard way, because I thought that personally myself. I was like, oh, it's an OEM motor. I haven't done anything. I haven't put a cam in it. I haven't put high compression pistons in it. I haven't changed anything. Well, my car ran fine, but then it would start misfiring, and I would have high RPM like power failures. It wasn't right. It was just misfiring constantly, and come to find out, it was just literally the scaling from the map sensor to what the ECU was rating. It was dumping like 25% more fuel than it needed. So me not being a tuner, didn't know that, and learned my lesson kind of the hard way. But now I know, hey, if you change something, swap it in, just go get it tuned. It'll just run so much better. And I don't regret doing it. All right, so that pretty much covers the engine itself. Oh, I didn't talk about the headers. Let's move over to the headers. All right, so I'm just running some Patriot E-Rod style headers. They're Shorties, block huggers, the real tight fit. Fairly inexpensive, like 300 bucks or whatever, which is really good for headers on something. I know that you, on this particular chassis with the FC, you can run the cast iron manifolds, but I ended up buying a set. I bought a really nice set of the hooker headers. They were cast and all that, but they were super heavy. Like, I picked up the box and I was like, never mind, because this thing is already 100 pounds heavier because of the cast iron block. I didn't want to add like another 60 to 70 pounds of weight in the front, just putting header or cast manifolds on there. So I didn't even put them on, took them back, and I kept these ones on here. I went with Shorties because of the transmission layout, and then that's kind of that should be our segue into talking about the transmission. Your normal swaps for an LS regarding the transmission is usually CD09, cut the bell housing, put T56 bell housing on it, and bolt it up. And then your other option is T56 right out the gate. T56s are getting pretty expensive. CD09 kits are pretty spendy, like 1,200 bucks, and then whatever it costs to get you a CD09. So currently I don't run either one of those setups, and I'm going to tell you why. I run a Z32 trans out of a 300ZX. It is far more inexpensive than running the other two kits. It's like half as much. So I paid 160 bucks for my transmission. I'm not saying everybody's gonna get that transmission for 160 bucks, but you should be able to find them. They're not very sought after currently. Like, there's some SR guys, I think, and some RB25 guys that might be trying to hunt those down. So normally I'd say they're like 300 bucks. But the kit itself is 700 bucks right now. When I bought it before inflation happened, it was 600 even. So basically right around 800 bucks, you know, give or take, I was able to bolt up a 5-speed manual transmission to my LS block. The transmissions are super hardy. They last a very long time. They hold up to power very well. I think the threshold is in the 600 foot-pound torque range. I never rate anything off of horsepower. It says 750 horsepower, but horsepower is not really what kills drivetrain parts. So I always go off of torque. Any good clutch company that you're ever looking at, if they rate their stuff off of torque, that's probably the brand you want to go with. If they're going off of horsepower, it doesn't really matter. Personal opinion there. Anyways, so what also was cool about running the Z32 trans was we talked about my Ronin Speed motor mounts, right? It also comes with a transmission mount. And typically when you run a different transmission than what the kit suggests, it doesn't actually fit. Mine actually ended up bolting up just fine. It didn't bolt up in the spot that the kit tells you to, or I guess would normally be. Because basically you're just drilling 2 holes in the tunnel. There's like some sandwich plates that all squish together, and it's actually not a bad design. At first I was kind of like, this is weird, but it worked out fine. I have no issues with the transmission tunnel or anything like that. So the other benefit, and this is the main benefit in my mind other than price, is the fact that with a Z32 you have an external slave cylinder. And with your CD09 swap or your T56 swap, it's an internal slave. So when your slave goes out with those 2 transmissions, you're pulling the transmission out. Nobody wants to be out of track and that be the component that fails, and you have to do it. I don't know how often those things fail. I don't really want to find out. So with the Z32 transmission and the external slave, it's literally like 10 minutes to swap it out, swap in a new one, and you're out like 12 bucks in very little time. So that to me is the biggest benefit of running this transmission. And also I've heard, I've never experienced it, that the T56 setups, or maybe it's more the CD09 swap, because you do have to cut the bell housing and do all that, is that getting the slave cylinder shimmed correctly to engage the pressure plate correctly, they have an issue with that. And I don't want to take my transmission in and out 20 times to get it shimmed correctly. I'd just rather stab it one time and kind of be done with it. So it's a much more reliable setup. I like it. It's similar to, if you guys have ever ran an SR transmission or a KA transmission, right there on the side of the bell housing. Now, the one con for me has been the starter placement. The starter placement is on the bell housing side of the transmission. So it's right there on the side. You gotta kind of beat the floorboard up just a little bit. It's just like 2 whacks and you're good. But that's not really the part that really bothers me. The part that bothers me is the fact that you cannot use long tube headers with that setup. For like this car, maybe some of the other cars and maybe the trucks or whatever, that's fine. You probably go around it or whatever, no issues there. But when you don't have a lot of space where that starter is and you have long tubes, usually those long tubes go right where that starter is. So that's why I run these, Patriot short tubes, so then when I belt the exhaust, I can kind of navigate around it. And so far, really that's the only issue. Now, going along with that is, because of where you have to route the exhaust and stuff like that, the starter does get a little warm and it'll heat soak, and you'll have a little bit of trouble getting started back up once it gets heat soaked. I do have a starter blanket on it, and I could probably wrap the exhaust, but that's really the biggest issue. Cold starts, fine, boom, boom. But so those are like the 2 flaws. It's basically all around the start. So now I guess we can kind of get into a little bit more into the chassis specific stuff real quick, and that's maybe the driveline, diff situation. and axle situation. So currently this car dynoed at 265 because it's completely stock, no cams or anything like that, and 305 foot-pounds of torque. So I currently run the NA Diff. And for you guys that aren't familiar, these RX-7s came with two different diffs. They came with an NA diff, which was a much smaller, weaker diff, and then a Turbo 2 diff, which was slightly beefier. But I currently run the weaker of the two. And for the longest time, I ran that diff thinking it was Turbo 2 because everybody was like, there's no way that your car would have lasted this long without breaking that diff. I was like, okay, so it must be a Turbo 2 diff. It wasn't until recently that when I actually did break it from actually hitting something considerably hard when I dirt dropped, it actually broke. And come to find out, and luckily, I was super stoked on this, is that it was an NA diff. And with an NA diff, people will just give it to you. They'll just hand you a diff and say, here you go, because everybody thinks they're garbage. Now, if we got up into the higher horsepower ranges, they might be garbage. But for my current setup, it's perfectly fine. People say they break them all the time or whatever. I don't have any issues. But I took a different approach. I made sure everything was stiff. I did solid bushings in the whole rear suspension. So everything is nice and stiff and tight. And the differential itself also has solid mounts on it, and the risers and everything to keep the geometry of the axles and everything correct. It's a small investment. It was like 110 bucks for just for the differential mounts and stuff like that. So these cars are really old. If you guys keep the stock rubber in them, that's when stuff's gonna break. I don't even think if you had a Turbo 2 diff that, you know, excessive movement and stuff like that is gonna cause these things to break. And so far this recipe has worked for me. This car is really, it seems like it's a lot because I go above and beyond on some of the other things with the paint and hoses and different stuff like that. But really this car, if you took all that stuff away and you just kind of did like normal hoses and no roll cage and no paint and stuff, like this car is really a budget friendly car. You know what I mean? I could tally up how much it probably cost me overall to build this car, not including suspension stuff. And it's probably under $4,000 to do this swap. And I'm highballing it there just to be safe and not, you know, because people forget that all the little things. So I say about $4 grand is probably what it costs with the clutch, the transmission, the driveline, the engine, all the accessory stuff, you know, and then add all the nickel and dime stuff in there. But I think that pretty much sums up the whole drivetrain engine thing. I'm not going to get into suspension for this. It is mainly about what I did for my LS swap. Just because people reach out to me, they want to know, and I want a place to kind of direct them and say, hey, go check out my YouTube channel. And while you're there, maybe watch some of the other videos and like and subscribe too. So if you guys made it this far in the video, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys watching. And if you guys have any more questions, you guys can hit me up on Instagram, No Smoke Johnny, Facebook, John Leedom, the name of the channel. And I will answer whatever questions, even if there are more questions about this stuff. Or let me know that I didn't talk about something that you wanted me to talk about. I'm going to be linking everything that I talked about in the description below, with the part numbers of everything I used. That part might take me a little bit longer than making the video, but some of it I already kind of know because I get asked it so much that I kind of have it memorized by now, because I just like keep sending people links and stuff like that. So, and that'll also help having it all in one location. So, all right, guys, Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this helps you guys with your LS builds in the future, and you know, and maybe it'll get you guys out on track faster, because a lot of this stuff is very budget friendly. You know, I always very conscientious about budget, because the more I spend on the car is actually the less I get to spend out on the track. So thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Ka-cha!